Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Friday, May 18th, 2025. I'm John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And social commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
So we do, as I mentioned yesterday when we had Dan Senor on, we have our June 2025 issue up for your perusal at commentary.org. If you are a subscriber, you can read all of it. If you are not a subscriber, you can read a couple of things, but you should be a subscriber. You know, you've heard me say it before. It's part of the compact between you and me and Christine and Seth and Matt and Abe that we're doing this. Help us along. Help pay for it. Help us go and read our stuff, because the glory of commentary, though I'm very grateful that a lot of you love to listen to us, and now increasing numbers of you like to watch us on YouTube. As Matt mentioned, we are now over 10,000 subscribers on YouTube, which is in about 5 months, which is really, really great. But the magazine, the website, which is, of course, dominated daily by Seth Mandel's posts, is the heart and soul of what we do. And Christine, just for an example, you have a piece in the June commentary up right now called Oligarchs Against Oligarchy. This is your social commentary column. Let's talk about it a little bit. So there's a lot of yelling and screaming about oligarchs controlling America from Bernie Sanders and AOC and others, but you discern a level of hypocrisy in this assault.
Yes, I'm very glad you didn't ask me to explain those women whipping their hair around as the president was walking down that during his Middle Eastern trip, because I'm still trying to wrap my head around that. Yes, so this column was prompted by a photo spread that many people might have seen or seen snippets of on social media in the New Yorker, showing fabulous New Yorkers in their living rooms, important New Yorkers. Some of the portraits, the photos are really quite charming. But several of them feature really, really wealthy, influential left-wing people like like Alex Soros, who is now running the Soros Foundation, global foundation, and his fiance, former Hillary Clinton advisor, Huma Abedin. And it just struck me because they were very casually dressed. It was a very weird tableau. They're obviously in this extremely expensive piece of Manhattan real estate having their photo taken. And this guy funds a lot of left-wing and Democratic Party causes. And I had been following the AOC and Bernie Sanders anti-oligarchy tour. And there was a funny moment there where Bernie Sanders was found to have spent, by the Washington Free Beacon, almost $250,000 on private jet travel during his anti-oligarchs tour. And there is, of course, the standing fact that Bernie Sanders himself is a millionaire, multimillionaire. And so I thought, what's going on in the Democratic Party? And there have been several academic studies recently showing what many of us have been talking about for a couple of years now, which is that wealthy people now vote Democratic. They don't vote Republican in the same level that they used to. So the Democratic Party is the party of wealth now. It's not just the coastal elite. It is the party of wealthy people. And yet their message is very much, we represent the working man, down with oligarchs. President Biden's farewell address in the White House mentioned the concerns of oligarchy. So how are they squaring this circle both culturally and politically? And I find they're not. They're in some form of denial right now. They really can't get their heads around the idea that a lot of Americans look at the Democratic Party now and go, that's a lot of rich people living in very rich coastal elite cities, and they don't really understand our problems. Meanwhile, their rhetoric remains the same, which is, oligarchy is bad, dark money is bad, while they rake in, people like Senator Chuck Schumer, for example, rake in, $80 million in a year and a half long period from a left-wing dark money group. So I tried to get at our understanding. Look, Americans have a complicated understanding and relationship with wealth. We resent wealthy people. We also admire them. We find them fascinating culturally. There are entire reality television series devoted to just chronicling their habits. So I think that I end up concluding that the Democratic Party really either needs to embrace its new luxury brand, or it needs to start acknowledging some of the contradictions in its the way its leaders live and what its leaders preach. And this will become increasingly important in the next presidential election, where you do have billionaires like Governor Pritzker of Illinois kind of thinking about running. This is someone of vast inherited wealth. How they deal with their own side's money and access to it, and how they talk to the American voter about it is going to, I think, become increasingly important in a populist moment such as ours.
Not just talk about the oligarchs and the oligarchs, or the weirdness of the photo spread in the New Yorker itself, because one would expect nothing less from Alex Soros, that he live in a startling penthouse with a 360-degree view of Manhattan. I mean, he's a billionaire. He's the son of a billionaire. He runs a foundation that gives out hundreds of millions of dollars of money. So that's fine. What it was most reminiscent of actually was a photo from 20 years ago of Gavin Newsom and his then wife, Kimberly Guilfoyle, when she was, I think, working in the San Francisco DA's office, and he was the mayor of San Francisco. And they were kind of splayed on the floor. She was kind of splayed on the floor of the living room, and he was kind of sitting above her, almost like it was a very sort of sexual shot. This wasn't sexual, but it was very lubricious in the sense that it was, look how rich we are. And I don't, that, so in that sense, it was
they're bathing in it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like all good photographs do, it told an entire story in a single image. Once you knew who they were, if you knew who they were, it enriched your sense of what kind of life all of this was, and how they live, and how the idea that this guy is sort of the leading philanthropist of the left, or one of the leading philanthropists of the left, and how insulated he would be from any
and a former party kid. Like, he's a former, his behavior was very much typical rich kid for many, many years. Like, he'd rent these spreads in the Hamptons, and there were always these New York Post stories about the wild parties with celebrities and models. But in this photo, they're both dressed very casually. There's not a lot, there's no like obvious art or anything. There are a couple coffee table books, but they're both posed in it looked to me like they were cosplaying middle-class people in this very expensive piece of real estate. It's all very much subdued wealth, subdued power, even though this is the same guy whose social media feed over the course of the last election was just full of trophy pictures of him with all the major leaders of the Democratic Party.
So I want to just bring this up because those are the oligarchs. And then you have the world of the Democratic politician who sees this as a winning issue, that, we stand up against the oligarchs. So here in New York, it is primary season, not only in the mayoral race, but in the New Jersey governor's race. And there are 4 or 5 Democrats competing for the governor position. Mikey Sherrill, Josh Gottheimer, Ross Baraka, a couple other people. Mikey Sherrill, former congresswoman or congresswoman, is in the lead in the polls. And in, I think, 3 of their ads, they all say they took on Trump and Musk. Not Trump. Trump and Musk stole $10 million from us, and we're going to get it back. Like that. Trump and Musk. So that's insider businessman and outsider, richest man in the world, and they're trying to screw you, and we want you. We'll fight them, right? So that's the Democratic Party's image of itself, and they think that this is selling. Meanwhile, Elizabeth Warren, yesterday or the day before yesterday, was walking down a corridor, asked a question by a reporter about Big Pharma, and said, I take no money from Big Pharma. Look at my website. And then somebody went back, and in 2019 and 2020, she received almost $1 million in campaign contributions from Big Pharma. So she was the 3rd largest recipient of money from the pharmaceutical industry. So I look at that. I look at this sort of Trump, Musk, and the oligarchs saying they're, Democrats talking about this. And it's not just that they seem out of touch, they're just lying to people about who they are and where their money comes from. And there was a time before the internet when I think you could get away with stuff like that because the funnel was very narrow and nobody really cared, and it's not like somebody would come out and say this is nonsense. But now you can have sort of anybody going to opensecrets.org and seeing where your money comes from or whatever, except for dark money, right? So dark money, which is political money that is given,
which the left raises more of and
way
uses more
right.
of than the right.
So,
That's very important to note.
Yeah. So this
they
is
rail against it, even though they use it.
Yeah. This is 501c4 money, which means that it's money that is given. It's not. It's taxable income. All of that, like any campaign contribution, but it is given to groups who do not have to report who their givers are, and so this is yeah. And so the Democrats at some point spending 10 years saying we hate campaign, we want public financing and all this. After the Supreme Court ruled that that you could not limit, you had to allow that the attack on campaign contributions, that this was a form of First Amendment speech and could only be limited in minor ways. They were like, okay, well, if we can't beat them, we're going to join them. And they spent 10 or 15 years courting rich people in a way they had not before, because they thought they couldn't. And lo and behold, not only could they compete with Republicans over money, they could best them. They could do better, way better. And so, but you can do way better, but you can't say that it's not true. I mean, you could try, I suppose.
Well, I mean, this is the challenge for people. Look, it's the Sanders example. Sanders is a sort of earlier generation effort to do this, right? He wasn't always a millionaire. He has a kind of way of speaking about this stuff that people bought into. The question is whether they're going to buy it with AOC and with a younger generation of Democrats who are coming up in the party and benefiting from these dark money groups and benefiting from this idea that they care about the working person, when a lot of their policies actually benefit the people who give their party money. I mean, this was the whole luxury belief idea, which Rob Henderson coined this phrase, luxury beliefs, being against the cops, being against anything but an open border. These are all policies that wealthy people in blue coastal cities love because they're not affected by them. Their wealth buys them insulation from the results of a high crime neighborhood, for example. And so I think that the Democratic Party's challenge will be convincing its own voters, and it didn't in the last election. Many of those voters went for Trump for this reason, saying, like, not just that they understand the problem, but they're not going to champion extreme culturally left-leaning policies that the average person doesn't support. I mean, you can talk about trans stuff, you can talk about the border. There's a whole list of things that took Trump across the finish line this time. And I haven't heard consistency yet among people like Pete Buttigieg, Kamala Harris, Pritzker, all these other, Westmore, other people who are kind of dipping their toe in the water on the Democratic Party's bench about perhaps running in 2028.
When rich people were dominating figures, or when sort of the upper middle class and the wealthy were Republicans, almost exclusively, let's say, except for showbiz people or something who didn't make as much money in the time I'm talking about than they did now. Rich people had a real beef with the federal government and with the governments in the states that they tended to congregate in, because before the Kemp-Roth-Reagan tax cuts of 1981, the top federal tax rate was 70%. And so no one paid it because immense amounts of effort had to go into figuring out how to shelter your money from this relatively confiscatory tax policy, where if you just followed the rules and did everything, you just, every dollar, 70 cents of it was taken by the federal government. And that's not even to talk about what state and local governments did. So in 1981, the tax rate was cut by 30% over 3 years, went down to about 40%, was then cut again to 28, has now then bounced back up to 35 and then up to 39. It's been in the 30s. And basically, the wealthy have made their peace with the tax rate. I mean, they think it's inefficient, there should be cap gains cuts and all of that. But the notion that what they need to do is prevent the confiscation of their own hard-earned money is no longer in their heads. And what's more, a lot of the people we're talking about, like Alex Soros, have generational wealth. They're not the creators of these companies and after the Depression and all of that who got rich and then had to contest with government taking way more of their money than they thought was fair.
Well, and but then there's that other, yes, and that has shifted. The interesting group now are the perhaps not generationally wealthy, but hard-earned wealthy, tend to vote Democrat, who do live in coastal cities. So they used to understand this message of, remember the country club Republican? It was an easy villain in a lot of the stories that Democrats told about our system. Well, it's now the story is concierge Democrats, people who have the wealth and opportunity to buy themselves out of all the day-to-day hassles that the average American has to deal with. And that's where I think they've got to come up with a better message than the oligarchs are bad, because the oligarchs are them, and their wealthy party elite are able to buy themselves out of all the day-to-day hassles that the average American voter and the average Republican voter now has to deal with.
Anyway, it's a great piece. It's a very important topic. It's an important topic in part because, like I say, it goes to just the fundamental honesty of politicians and political parties. And it is perfectly acceptable to be the party of the rich in this sense, which is, okay, so people have concerns. They have the right to use their money to express their concerns. If they care about, global warming so much, it's so important to them, and that's what they want to put at the forefront of their agenda, they're free to do so. But they can't then pretend that they are really helpful to a working class guy in Pennsylvania who owes his job to fracking. Like you can't have it. You can try to have it both ways, but the cognitive dissonance is inescapable. That's, I think, what the Alex Soros and Huma Abedin photograph shows, that, this is just something that they are going to have to reckon with because other people will reckon with it. I mean, in this sense, like J.D. Vance becomes the Republican nominee in 2028, and what is his life story is that his mother was an addict. He lived with his crazy grandparents who nonetheless provided him with a measure of stability. And as Kevin Williamson wrote in our pages, like J.D. Vance's book is not about being part of the underclass. His grandparents actually made a decent living. It was about social chaos, but he lifted himself up by his bootstraps, worked at Home Depot, got himself scholarships, went into the Marines, all of that. And he would be a very good voice to say, I lived in Middleton, Ohio. What do you know? What do all you people know? And so AOC could say, well, I was a bartender. And he was like, yeah, you were a bartender. Your dad was an architect. You moved to good school districts. Like, don't hand me your bartender credentials. That worked with idiots in Brooklyn, but it's not going to work on me. So that's a real thing. And if I think the populist Americans who are governing things, they have much less resentment of wealth than I would have thought.
Okay, this is a really important point because I think the Democratic Party elite thinks the average American must hate the wealthy because the wealthy are sticking it to them. That's not how it works. They're fascinated by wealth. They admire actually people like Elon Musk who made themselves billionaires. They do have a healthy suspicion of people with vast resources, obviously, but it's the fascination and respect. And I do go all the way back to one of our founders, John Adams, who I think had one of the most incisive understandings of American wealth. He too worried about oligarchy. And his point, though, was that wealth is like beauty. It's always going to be unequally distributed and people are always going to admire and be fascinated by it. And that's not fair, but it is how things work. So I think that part, and that's where, for me, the example remains. Trump in his full expensive tailored suit, putting on a McDonald's apron over that suit and working the fryer. A Democrat would have worn the uniform or dressed down or been like, I'm one of you guys. He doesn't pretend. And it's the lack of pretense in populism.
Or looked ridiculous.
Yeah, oh yeah, exactly.
I mean, the thing about Trump is that it's such a cartoonish picture that he pulls it off because of who he is. And that's, anybody else who would have done it, it would have been, like putting on a helmet and sitting in a tank. It was like that looks ridiculous. And we will forever remember you trying to look cool, but looking ridiculous. But Trump has this, there's a picture, one of the greatest pictures of his time in office is when he invited the championship football team to the college football team to a celebration at the White House. And he had, I guess it was Big Macs or Burger King. Well, I think it was Big Macs.
The
but
table.
It was burgers a table of burgers.
Yeah, like in a ziggurat.
Yeah. And
right?
they were in like containers and it was like a feast of fast food burgers. It wasn't set up to look like, 3 little sliders on a glass plate or something. It was very clearly a sort of McDonald's type situation, although I don't think it was McDonald's exactly. And then the picture, there was a picture.
It was McDonald's.
Yeah, I thought it was McDonald's.
Was it McDonald's? Oh, it was McDonald's.
Totally
okay,
McDonald's.
Yeah. So I mean, it was set up to be that sort of.
Yeah. Right,
and then there's like this picture of what is it? Abe Lincoln looking over his shoulder as Trump like smiles and gives a thumbs up in front of these burgers, and it's like. There's so much about America in the picture of Abe Lincoln looking down on President Donald Trump giving a thumbs up in front of, 180 McDonald's burgers or whatever. But because it's ridiculous, he pulls it off. And also because he doesn't pretend to be working class. He has the gold toilets. He loves that people know that. He loves that people know that he's rich. He wants to fly in a nicer plane. And if Boeing can't make it for him, he's going to take one from the Qataris so that he can have a plush plane and travel and style and all this stuff. And so I think that Trump represents at the same time the wealth and the striving for it, and he pulls off the balance in a kind of weird way that I don't know, it works.
It's also, I mean, this is a point that John made years ago, and I thought it was such a great point, that Trump has spent ages becoming a popular personality in this alternate pop culture that the working class enjoys. The NASCAR and wrestling and whatever else,
ultimate fighting.
Right. Yeah. He shares their enjoyment of it. That's
who is his education secretary right now? Secretary of Education was the CEO of the World Wrestling Federation. Yeah. So no, but I mean, I think also he's in on the joke, right? That's the thing. The thing about Trump that you have to remember is that he's a comic figure. There is a sense in which this is all a put on, and he tells you it's a put on. It's like, love those camels. It's like half the time he is throwing off one-liners like he's at the Friars Club. And so it's not like he's very proud and he doesn't like getting insulted. And you could say his entire political career is because Obama tried to make him the butt of a joke at the 2011 White House Correspondents' Dinner. That's what really impelled him to run. That's what a lot of people say. So like everybody else, it's like there are limits to, as long as he's the one making the joke, putting on the apron over his suit, doing, like bringing in burgers, like repaving, putting up gold leaf in the Oval Office, which he likes and he wants to do what he wants to do and all that. Why can't I do it? But there is still this aspect that it's all performance and it's all a joke. The weird thing about the Democrats is how humorless they have become in their own self-presentations and how easily they are mocked. So let's just take this week for an example. Next Tuesday is the publication date of the Jake Tapper, Nick Thompson book, Original Sin, about Biden's infirmities and the cover-up of those infirmities. And all week, Democratic politicians and Democrats in general have been asked questions because of the release of details from the book and this excerpt that was in the New Yorker that came out, I think, on Tuesday and all of that. when did they know? What did they know? When did they know? Right? And they're all, including Jake Sullivan, his own national security advisor, they're all saying, the debate performance, it was just so shocking. I can't believe that it's like this. And it was
Can
like
I
this.
just
Yeah,
can
go
I
ahead.
just interrupt for a tiny mini rant
Yeah.
because you described the book as about the cover up of Joe Biden's health, and that's not actually the purpose of the book. The
Right.
purpose of the book is to run cover for a media establishment that knew very early on that Joe Biden wasn't capable of this, knew it long before the debate, constantly lied about it, constantly covered it up, and now you have these two guys going around interviewing people who they knew were all like them, understood the cover up, pretending that the debate was the moment that they all had their eyes opened, including the media. And that gives them cover for two questions. One, the fact that they knew much earlier on and didn't want to report it and avoided strenuously reporting it and mocked people on the right who did report it. And two, because they never want to ask the more important question, not could he run again, but at what point was he constitutionally unable to fulfill his duties as president, as a sitting president, and why didn't Kamala Harris and others in his cabinet who knew that he wasn't able to do this do something about it? That's actually the true scandal. And this book,
Right.
as you can tell, infuriates me. It is itself a form of covering up what in fact is the real story.
So we haven't seen the book yet, and I imagine
Based on the excerpts.
Right. And I
interviews.
imagine that this is dealt with in the book. That
I don't.
Okay, we'll see. But I would be surprised if there isn't. Nick Thompson doesn't need to do a mea culpa. Jake Tapper does need to do a mea culpa. Nick Thompson was covering the Biden story, and Jake Tapper has been surfaced throughout the 2 years that the Biden infirmity thing was a real thing, since we were talking about it in 2022, has been surfaced poo-pooing it or interviewing people in a poo-pooing way or whatever. And he's going to have to deal with it. But the reason the rant is great, and you're probably right, and we'll see the book on Tuesday. But what struck me about this was how manifestly unprepared and uncomfortable these people, these leading Democratic figures, Chuck Schumer, others, Adam Schiff, all of that, are to deal with the simple thing that they could say if they were like sensible or honest or whatever, but also trying to say something that they had to say and say, look, we had a major concern in the idea that Donald Trump was going to be returned to power. And we were very, very worried about Donald Trump's being returned to power. And we knew one thing about Joe Biden, which is that he was the one person in America who beat Donald Trump. 16 Republicans lost to him. Joe Biden beat him. And look where we are now. In my opinion, Donald Trump is leading the country toward it. I'm in the voice of generic Democrat here, not speaking for myself. He's leading us down the road to late 1930s Germany. He's going to suspend habeas corpus. He's going after his political rivals. He's using the FCC to shut down free speech. He's deporting people, all of this. We were right. We were right to be worried. And if we erred, we erred because we wanted to save America from Donald Trump. Now, you may think that's not the greatest answer, but it's the only answer. Because first of all, it's true. It is the true answer. Do Democrats love Joe Biden and worship him and think he was the greatest thing since sliced bread? No, that was Barack Obama for a while. They didn't love him. They didn't have this emotional relationship with Joe Biden. The last time he ran for president, when he ran for president in 2008, he got less than 1% of the Democratic primary vote. They were happy with him because he stopped Trump and he came in, and then he did a lot of left-wing stuff, and they were sort of in control of him and in command of him, and they could say what I just said because it was the deepest truth about them. But they're not saying it because they've lost the thread about how to be responsive to real news.
But I mean,
in my view,
the problem with that answer is the unspoken part of it is, so that's why we lied to you.
Right. But I mean, it's saying, but
like Fauci with the
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
A noble
okay,
lie in a way.
they've been cornered, right? They're in a corner, and so there's no good answer. So then
Yeah.
the question is, what is the least bad answer? And I think the least bad answer would be to say everything that I was worried about in the return of Donald Trump to office is coming true. He's selling the country. Qataris are owning us, and we're doing this and we're doing that, whatever. Everything I was worried about was coming true. And if Joe Biden were president today, in a wheelchair and even semi-infirm, whatever the country would be.
That doesn't
Okay.
answer the question of whether or not he could, in fact, be the president. And I think, again, it implicitly implies Joe Biden was a means to an end for people in the party who just were worried about Trump.
You're
That means
right
it doesn't
that
matter if he's actually
you're right that it's
co-momentous.
not good. You're right that it's not a good answer. I am not saying that it's a good answer. I'm saying that it is a better
I think
answer.
they should just say, you know what, we risked we gambled on this guy being able to do this again. It was a bad bet we placed. Some of them will dissemble and say we didn't really know how bad it was. He was being protected. It's interesting to me that they're starting to throw Dr. Jill under the bus too. You notice she's starting to emerge as the villainess in a lot of these narratives because that again provides them cover. But I think they should just acknowledge their error and acknowledge, I mean, they're never going to acknowledge the cover up, but actually the cover up is the thing that I think voters sensed intuitively from very early on in his term as presidency. I mean, 2022, people were commenting, and not just in the right wing, just in general, there was a kind of, oh, is he going to be the bumbling Gerald Ford on SNL
Majority of Democratic
character?
voters said he was too old to run again. Right?
Yes.
One poll had 70% or something like it of
No, it was
Democratic
66% of Democrats,
66%
75% of the country.
But it was unnerving to watch him be president even before we were talking about reelection. That's the part that I want to see addressed in this book. And I will give it the benefit of the doubt. I will read it when I can get a copy. But that's the part where I'm like, unless they engage that question, which everyone saw in real time, they are lying to their readers.
By the way, the Democrats have settled on now their new best answer is we're looking forward. That memo went out, and that's the default now to this. Well, we're looking forward. We're looking ahead.
Well, so
I also think that they struggle with the Biden thing because why was Biden the guy who could beat Trump? Why did they need Joe Biden? Because he has a sense of humor about himself, and because he, regardless of his station in life, he still appeals to working class and blue collar voters and all that stuff. And I think that Democrats, rather than seeing that as, something that helped them, I think they're embarrassed. I think that they resent what they had to do. I think that I think they don't like having to reach out and appeal to people who would like Joe Biden and Donald Trump.
Oh, you're absolutely right. That was you hit the nail on the head. Not literally. It's the obviously opposite of literally that you hit the nail on the head here. You metaphorically hit the nail on the head. Like, who is it that Barack Obama was talking about in 2008 when he talked about the bitter clingers and you have to understand. We really all have to understand these people who cling to their guns and their religion because they're scared. They're afraid of the future. So that was the condescending version of which is the resentful version, which is what Tim Walz said at Harvard last week, I think, when he said, we all know why I was chosen because I'm white male coded.
Which a regular white male would never say. That's
because I could talk about football. It's like, are you kidding me? Like, if that's actually why he was chosen, of course they lost. It's the dumbest shit I've ever heard in my entire life. Because he was a high school football coach and he looked like Homer Simpson. Like, am I taking crazy pills?
Energy than Kamala at some of those rallies too. Like, I mean, really, in terms of expressing himself and the jazz hands and
this guy.
Why didn't they like that? That they shelved them.
Congressman, 2-term governor of Minnesota, said at that same thing that he did not sleep for weeks before the vice presidential debate because he was so terrified. Like, seriously, you most competitive people in politics who have a strong sense of themselves will be like, let me in there. Let me at him. Let me at that little pissant JD Vance with his, cutesy little beard and everything. I'll rip him limb from limb. If you were like such a white male coated football player, you would want to tackle JD Vance, not like cringe in your bed, unable to sleep with anxiety. Like this is where the party is in desperate cultural or emotional straits. Like they are talking themselves into an inability to speak to the people who decided that they would want to vote, that they wanted to vote for Trump, or that they were. I don't even think that's why Biden won or was chosen or whatever. He ended up being the nominee of the Democratic Party because he was the only one who wasn't too left wing to loot. Like he was the only one who
he had
wasn't
Democratic African American voters. He had the African American vote on his side in the Democratic Party, which was crucial for the primary process, and he wasn't the least left wing in the primary.
And once the most left wing group in the party, then as it aged and as they saw white people going psycho in the 2010s, they said, you liberals are all, or you left wingers are all crazy. Like you're not, and none of you goes to church, and I don't like you. So I'm just saying, like that's not why he didn't win, because he could appeal to Trump voters. That's not why Biden won in 2020, the nomination or the presidency. And the fact that I think Seth is right, that A, that's what they think, and B, they resent it, because that's not the America they like. That's the America that they don't like and wish, in the Great Replacement, they wish to replace. They want to pave over.
Democrats don't like Trump voters, but they also don't like Joe Biden voters.
If they're right. Okay, so but
to the extent there is such a thing as a Joe Biden voter.
Yeah. I mean, if the core if the people that you look at and you say, if you were to draw a cartoon of a very large party, right? The Democratic Party is tens of millions of people are Democrats, if not hundreds of millions of people are Democrats. But if you were to draw a cartoon of a Democratic voter, the cartoon would look like a 37-year-old guy living in Brooklyn or a 37-year-old woman living in Brooklyn, right? If you were to draw a cartoon of a Trump voter, you would draw a 55 to 60-year-old white man with a gun, who is watching wrestling.
Whose best friend is a Hispanic working class guy, actually.
Fair enough. Right. Okay. So who's more numerous? Who are there more of? And geographically, where are they better distributed across the country for national elections? Right. This is the story of the Democratic Party. It dominates in 10 metropolitan areas and nowhere else in the entire United States. 10 metropolitan areas. There are 3,300 counties in the United States. Trump won 2,600 of them. So the Democratic Party has to find a way to distribute itself better across the country, right? And they can't figure it out, and they can't figure it out in part because they are living a lie. They're living a lie about who they are and how they appeal to people, is what I think. And that's part of the Tapper story and part of the oligarch story and part of all of this. It's not that Americans need them to be authentic or whatever. I don't even think that's right. It's like they don't like the people who actually pick who are going to be our major leaders.
But I will add the one thing, I don't think I included in the piece, but the one politician on the left trying to do this, and I'm not sure he's going to thread this needle, is Pritzker, who made a joke a billionaire joke about a hundo millionaire at Trump's expense, joking that, oh, he should talk to a real billionaire. He thinks he's wealthy. So but that actually isn't going to play either. He's kind of embracing his generational wealth, but in a way that still sounds kind of condescending and obnoxious rather than, if you want to attack Trump about not being as rich as you, I mean, that's a kind of like your yacht is bigger than his. I don't know. That doesn't play either. So they're testing out different ways of having their wealthy candidates actually not pretend to be authentic working class people, but so far it's fallen flat.
And they also have to play.
They
also have to play a different game from Trump's. I mean, you can't when you try to do exactly what you think you perceive your opponent is doing like that. It doesn't work, especially with him, because for Trump, it's so, this is going to be a weird word to use, organic, but it is his sense of boastfulness is organic.
Also, if they want to look forward, they should really look forward. Trump is not, despite all of the Narishkeit here, Trump is not going to be the nominee of the Republican Party in 2028. He is the issue now. He is the 800, he is the gorilla. He's the horse in the hospital. He is everything in American politics now. But if you're looking ahead, you're running for the future. If you're going to try to look forward, that means stop having arguments about, figure out what America's like and see what you can say that will be meaningful to people in America. And the problem is that issue after issue after issue, Democrats are committed, ideologically committed, as they were in the 1970s, to ideas about America or ideas about things that are inimical to things like economic growth, primarily economic growth, but also a sense of pride in the country, right? I mean, they are part and parcel of a consensus that says that the story that we need to tell about ourselves is how wounded and pained and victimized we are by our own history, whereas everybody else in the world looks at us and says, how do I get some of that? Like, you guys, you make $72,000 a year in per capita income. How do I get there? And we're saying, we were so mean to people 175 years ago.
But they're trying a shift in that direction. So the abundance stuff, Ezra Klein's book, they were the special star guests at a recent Democratic Party, conference, and you did see the trickle down effect of that messaging in some of the Democrats' leadership talking. The problem is, I think, again, to go to this question of what voters want to know from them, if you're going to start arguing that we should be deregulating the housing industry, and they're basically doing a very free market, very Republican coded messaging now about the economy, they have to still answer the question, well, why did you give up these other policies? So what's changed? And it can't just be, well, Trump, because these are still things that the right is trying to do as well. So the abundance messaging, I don't think is going to be long-term effective, because the other problem is that the leadership of not just the Democratic Party, but a lot of the NGO complex around it are very highly educated white people, largely women. And they are going to stick with the message that you're describing right now, John, because it is their culture, it's their worldview, it's the air they breathe.
Look, we have a really wonderful review of the book Abundance by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson by Michael Warrenoff in the same issue as your Oligarchs piece, the June issue. Go and subscribe. And he makes the same point that you do, which is like, this is very supply side-ish, saying, we need to, there's a housing affordability problem because of regulation. We need to fix that. To have the future we want, we need to build more of what we need, they say. But what he says is they have no answer to how to get there.
Well, they still want government to do most of the work. They want government to do a lot of those building. Yeah.
They say that, rather, as Warrenoff writes, rather than shrink the size of government, Klein and Thompson proposed to make it more effective. And it's like, great. That always works. How fantastic. You think this didn't occur to people before? There are better ways to regulate. There are more efficient ways. But by
they're
the way,
from the media, and they're here to help, John. That's the new.
Yeah. No, but I mean, it's true on the margins that there are, worse and better ways to deploy regulation. But if the central problem is that you impose regulations on housing that increase the cost of housing stock to a point at which you can't build modest housing for people because of safety codes and because of zoning rules and because of this and because of that, the only thing you can do to fix it is to remove the blocks. And they're not willing to say remove the blocks. What they're willing to do is say, here's what we need, and yada, 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 then we'll have it. And isn't that great? And whatever hatred you have for Republican rhinos or Republican whatever, right this week, as they've been debating and apparently failing to get anywhere on the big, beautiful bill, they are grappling with this question of how much spending is too much at the federal level and where can it be cut, because something's got to be cut, because we are on an unsustainable path to national bankruptcy, basically. And what can we do? One of the things we can do is lower regulations to create more economic growth, because economic growth is the only way out of a spiral that we're in. If we're not willing to cut spending, we need to grow like crazy in order to forestall the inevitable moment when the government goes broke because of entitlements. And Democrats are not willing to say that. They are not supporters of economic growth. They are genuinely not supporters of economic growth. That's neoliberalism. Neoliberalism isn't just global trading. Neoliberalism is, you're right, there's a lot of we really overdid things in some of these regulations and we need to pare them back or slice them and all that. So the entire conversation about this, when it comes to actual working it out at the ground level, is taking place within the Republican Party. Now, it's an ugly conversation. It's not going well and all that, but at least there's a conversation. And abundance is not a conversation. It's a slogan. And then when you say, okay, put meat on the bones, Klein and Thompson can't put any meat on the bones because it requires them crossing orthodox lines that they're not willing to cross.
By the way, it's a slogan that comes from wellness, doesn't it? This was like, you would hear this.
Oh, it's supposed to make you feel good.
Yeah. You should have an abundance mindset. Was where this, I think, started, and then it moved over into liberal politics.
Yeah. I mean, the hilarity of it, of course, is that it is a way of avoiding using the word wealth.
Exactly.
Right? Abundance is sort of like a natural thing. Like, oh my God, the soil in upstate New York is so great, produces an abundance of beautiful, vegetables or something like that. It's just sort of naturally occurring abundance. And we're talking about things that have to happen to get out of the way of people producing.
Yeah, like who owns the land on which all that soil is being abundant, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's also the exact opposite of the argument they used to make about peak oil, right? I mean, the idea that our resources were limited. Abundance is meant to evoke the idea that you're going to bring about a situation in which you're not going to run out of stuff. The next time that there's a bad flu season, all the toilet paper is not going to be bought out at your local CVS or supermarket or whatever, because we live in abundance. You're not going to have to be a prepper. You're not going to have to stay ahead of the curve and, live in the mindset of what resources must I collect. You're not going to have to figure out alternatives for the things you use now. The things you use now, you will continue using, and you will have the peace of mind of living in a state where you don't have to constantly wonder how you will eventually replace the thing that you center your life on right now.
In the end, one of the great divisions, Rich Lowry said this, I remember, on the National Review cruise right after Trump won in 2016 that I was on, in the old days of the National Review and the magazine cruises. And he said, I think we've all had this experience that the people that we meet who are voting for Trump, and remember, Republican Party was much more divided then about Trump than it is now. Only 45% of the Republican primary electorate voted for Trump, but winner take all rules meant that he won won the nomination on the first ballot. So people weren't, MAGA was not the dominating force in American politics as it seems to be now. And he said, well, we all had this experience that you meet people who work with their hands and they're all voting for Trump. From high end types like a builder to a plumber to a factory shop floor worker to whatever, people who work with their hands are voting for Trump. What is as opposed to thought workers, right, who are much more divided? What does that tell you? So Trump, even in the most sentimental readings of Trump's trade war and everything, Trump and the Republican Party is now on the side of the makers, of people who make things. And the problem is we don't make enough things here. We need to make more things here and not buy so many things from other places. We need to make things in America and do things in America. And the reason that's a successful message, and the Democrats are like on a suicide mission here, is that they're like, okay, great, let's make things. Okay, what's the minimum wage going to, like, how can we increase the minimum wage on that making? And what are the OSHA regulations going to be to make sure that everybody is really safe in that factory? And we better make sure that everybody has to buy a more expensive car to drive to the facility where they're going to make this stuff because of the problems of global warming and all of that. They're not like, okay, yeah, let's try to, we agree, we need to make more things. How do we do that? How do we get a slice of that pie? They don't want to make more things. They want to say that they want to make more things, but they don't want to do anything that makes it easier to make more things. They want to make it harder. That's who they are. And it's not, I mean, they're not, 10% of the, they're still, yeah, go ahead.
This has always struck me when people talk about the nanny state, criticize the left for being a nanny state, that it's not the mommy daddy divide, right? Like, so the daddy is the risk taker in this, ridiculous stereotype. But they are the nanny state. So the nanny is hyper risk averse because their job depends on it. And that's where you start to think about the Democratic Party. They are now the party of risk aversion. And one of the things that's been very appealing, I mean, we criticize, I think, correctly when they go a little too far, but Trump, and particularly the sort of Musk Doge-like temperament, is very, very much about embracing certain risks. It is the move fast and break things, which can end up breaking important things. But so we need some brakes on it. But they are really embracing that. And I do think that speaks to, again, to a hunger among the voter that when things don't work, and we've tried the same thing over and over again, both parties back and forth, blow it all up or blow it all open and see if we can find new ways of doing things. And abundance is still the cautious nanny, like underneath the monkey bars, making sure they catch that kid.
So we haven't said anything about Ukraine and Russia and the fact that the Ukrainians and the Russians showed up in Turkey and went to two different cities. They were supposed to have a negotiation. Apparently, one thought it was in Ankara and the other thought it was in Istanbul. I don't even know who is who. Putin didn't show up. Trump is now saying, I'm going to have to go meet directly with Putin if this isn't going to work. I don't know when he's going to wash his hands of this. How long is he going to go on with this? Abe, this is a burr under your saddle, but I mean, like, Putin's not stopping the war.
Right.
So I don't know why he's investing so much capital in this.
Well, if in talks, Putin is stringing Trump along in one way or another, it doesn't take much. If you can just keep stringing him along, Trump will stay with this. He loves to be able to say, we've actually made some progress, and pretty soon there's going to be an announcement. I hope that I think you're going to be pretty surprised about, but can't say too much about it right now. And if he can say that for 3 more months, he will, because anything's better than saying, which he'll never say, I failed. Yeah. But he'll say, look, this was never my war to begin with. Leave me alone about this.
Right, yeah. But I mean, that's what he should say. I mean, in the end, like, that's the joke of this whole thing, is it's almost like he can't believe. And I understand it. Like, he sort of looks at the situation. He's like, I can't believe Putin wants to go on with this. There are reports that the Russians have lost up to 1 million fighters. in 3 years. Like,
Russians have a very different understanding of war
Yeah.
and its purpose than the
Right.
West.
But it's 1 million people are children, and they're killing children, and he doesn't like that they're killing children and all of that. And like, Putin is perfectly, maybe a child, maybe he gets extra points for a child because it's smaller. Like, that's who Putin is. And Trump, so he's looking at it going, what are you doing? Just get out of this. I've already said, look, if you just stop now, you'll get to keep what you got. It's going to be very, even Zelensky is sort of acknowledging the inability that he's going to have to get back territory that you've taken. So it's a win. Take the win. And he's like, Putin's basically like, you have no idea what a win means to me. I'm Genghis Khan. Like, what I need to see is, the lamentation of the women. Like, I need it all. I need it all, and I'm going to have it all, and you're not going to stop me, or whatever. And so, but I mean, I do love the fact that they went to two different cities. That is the perfect.
There's this very forlorn image of Zelensky sitting alone on a stage, like he's shown up for the prom and his date has ditched him. It was very
I like the idea.
Except his date was the like ugly girl that his mom insisted that he take because he didn't want to be there either. I'm sorry,
I know the cousin in this scenario. Yeah, no.
I like the idea. Exactly. I like the idea that if you're in. That it matters at all that you're in the same country if you're not in the same city. Like, well, they're both in Turkey.
Yeah.
It's like they're in different cities. He could be in Dublin. It doesn't, there's no difference between him being in Ankara and him being in Dublin right now. If everybody else is somewhere else, like this, it's like, well, we're both in New Jersey. We're
Why can't they do it on Zoom anyway? They could just do it all on Zoom. I mean, they don't need to be in the same room. It's like, that's a talk about a boomer idea. They all need to negotiate peace deals at face to face. Like, I'm sorry. By the way, everybody should look at the Dispatch and read Christine's piece on why people do need to go back to the office, even though I'm saying now that Zelensky
not every day, all day, but face to face. How we get things done face to face matters. Yes.
Yeah, the existence of society needs to be reinforced at the workplace, like that we are human beings who need to see each other. Not that I have seen any of you in months, by the way, but such is life. Anyway, so we'll leave it there. We didn't talk about the Supreme Court or anything. It's worth reading about this case, because if you think this case was about birthright citizenship, the big case yesterday had nothing to do with birthright citizenship, has everything to do with nationwide injunctions, which is a subject that we've published. Adam White has published a lot about in our pages. Anyway, so that's worth studying up on, because the court is dividing in fascinating ways on this matter. Anyway, have a wonderful weekend. We'll be back on Monday. For Christine, Abe, and Seth, I'm John Butthortz. Keep the candle burning.